Today's watch is a very lovely Panerai Luminor. It's not running at all when it came in. It's got a beautiful dial, really nice AR crystal. I like the crown guard feature. Beautiful exhibition back. Swan neck regulator, blued screws, Geneva bars with rhodium plating. Just a very nicely, highly finished watch. Nice simple mechanism. Very reliable, based on an ETA 6497, I believe. There is some black dust in there, where there is a problem in this watch, which we'll get into later, but basically that's the movement eating itself there. You can see it slightly, but you'll see it more when I take the back off and put it down on the white paper. So the first thing we need to do to take the watch apart is to get the crown guard out of the way. Obviously a very prominent feature of this watch. There's just 2 screws in there, and then that pops off. That one out. Then under here you see there's another screw in there. Important to use quite a big screwdriver for this. You don't want, in general, you don't want screwdriver blades that are smaller than the diameter of the screw head. That's how you can get damaged screw heads. It looks more like a traditional watch now. You can see the 2 holes where that was screwed in. I'm going to take the strap off as well. This again is secured with screws. These are very rugged watches. They are originally, there was some link between Panerai and the Italian military, and they still have the military look about them and the functionality of things like screwed in bars. So especially if you lock the thread with a little bit of Loctite, the strap is not going to be coming off when you're using the watch, even in some quite rugged situations. We've got this hand tool for Panerai case backs, so we can loosen that. That fits perfectly, so there's not any scratching or anything like that. When I take this off, you'll see the black dust. Now you can see that that's clearly something to do with the winding mechanism, because you can see it around the winding wheel and the mainspring winding wheel, the ratchet wheel. Yeah, I scratched some of that off. There's quite a lot in there. And that's basically part of your movement eating itself. So you see, this is a non-runner. If I apply a tiny bit of pressure to the wheel, which the mainspring basically meshes with, you can see the watch starts running. So that's quite often a sign of a broken mainspring. However, we've done quite a few of these watches, and we've seen them come in with the symptoms of a broken mainspring, but because we're on the finer teeth of the barrel on this, because it's the higher beats per hour version of the 6497, I think it's 21.6 for this movement, that means the teeth have to be finer in order to achieve that higher beat. And the consequence of that, the finer teeth are weaker, so when the power is applied from the mainspring, you've got a lot of torque at that end of the train. So the weaker teeth, they are more prone to snapping. So I've seen quite a few of this this version of the 6497.2 with broken teeth. It turns out this was actually the problem on this watch as well. The mainspring inside the barrel was actually perfectly fine. Beautiful dial. I think the reason I like these watches so much is because they're quite simplistic, but they're very well executed. They're absolutely beautiful for me. They're a bit too big for my wrists. I have really thin wrists, but if I had a slightly thicker wrist, I would have one of these. They just don't suit me very well, but I do appreciate them. As usual, I use the Patek dial and hand removal levers with just a torn bag to protect the dial and hands. I was shown this by a former head of the Rolex repair workshop in the UK, and since I've been doing that, I've never seen a dial damage or a set of hands damaged from this method. First thing to do with this watch is have a look under this mainspring barrel bridge, so we can diagnose the fault that we already suspect. We did one just about 2 weeks before this, the same movement with the same fault. This screw on here is actually a reverse thread, so bear that in mind when you're unscrewing it. It goes the opposite direction. I do have a lot of appreciation for this movement. It's very reliable. As soon as it's serviced, you wind it up and you get great amplitudes. There are a few movements I really appreciate. There's a 7750, the Rolex 3135, and this. And any watch based on those three movements, I absolutely love them. They're reliable, they last for a very long time, even without service. We see them where they come in with 15 years with no service. You service them and they run like new. They really are great movements. There's a reason that a lot of people, when they're making school watches, they'll use this as the base movement, because you can make new plates for it, make it look absolutely beautiful. They're a good size to work on, and they run brilliantly for years. This barrel bridge is very attractive. Lovely finishing by Panerai. And here's the mainspring barrel. You have to see what we suspected right from the start. You can see it already there, broken teeth. Hard to focus, but I think that looks like 3 or 4 teeth. I think it's 3 teeth all gone. It's not enough to just replace that mainspring barrel, put the bridge back on and have the watch running again. That will probably work and you'll have the watch running, but those 3 teeth are somewhere in the movement, so you need to service the watch as well. Beautiful finishing under the dial. Always a sign of a high quality watch when there is finishing where nobody but a watchmaker will see it. Normal owner of this watch is not going to take the dial off, but we've got that lovely perlage effect underneath, bright rhodium plating. Just a lovely watch to work on. Panerai have also finished this setting lever spring very nicely. I wanted to feature this watch because we do a lot of Rolex in this workshop. I would say 90% of our work is Rolex, but I'm a bit conscious that if I just keep putting the same Rolex service up, then the videos won't be too interesting. So I decided we'd feature a couple of different watches, and I do have a lot of appreciation for Panerai, so I chose this one. This service is actually quite a simple service. It's one you learn when you're in either your first or second year of watchmaking school, because it's just a lovely movement to work on. Everything's quite large, and as I say, the quality is great, so you get good results after you service them. So if you are looking into learning watch repair, well, there's one of those missing teeth that I mentioned. There we are. So that obviously, if we did not service the watch, that would have still been there, causing havoc in the movement. As I was saying, if you are looking into learning watch repair, I would recommend this movement. You can buy 6497 movements on their own, around about £300 for the Swiss ones. I would say use the Swiss one because they are better quality. If you can find technical guides or YouTube videos that can walk you through a step-by-step instructional on how to service the movement and clean it, put it back together, this is a great one to learn with. When I was learning to replace balance staffs, basically had one of these movements, and I just changed the balance staff several times over and over again. It's an excellent watch for students. Obviously you probably don't want to start on a Panerai, but you can just by the movement alone, by looking for an ETA 6497 or 6498, or even an older version by Unitas. It doesn't necessarily have to be running IV, because I was told when I first started watchmaking, the first watch you work on, you'll destroy it. So that from what I've seen of some people learning watchmaking right from the start, that is quite often true. So it's probably a good idea to buy a non-working movement, a 6497, and just start. Just don't be afraid of it. Just if something breaks, there are a lot of parts available for these, and you'll get a sense of accomplishment if you get one that's not working and you can get it running. I like how Panerai have separated the bridge for the escape wheel from the rest of the wheels. Another sign of a high quality mechanism. I normally don't feature the whole service. When we service a watch, it's quite often about 8 hours, 10 hours, that sort of thing, by the time you've done the whole thing. So I try and compress that down into a 30-minute video. With this, it's not too complicated a movement. So you see we've pretty much stripped the whole thing in the video, and we're at 12 minutes now. So it's not one that's going to take you hours and hours to work on. There are lifting slots there for your screwdriver, so basically just push in and pull slightly upwards. And there's the rest of the train. It's always a good idea to completely strip movements when you're servicing. You can buy attachments for cleaning machines where you suspend whole movements or partially stripped movements. I don't like to do it because moisture gets trapped. You can't clean it properly. You can't examine the wheels and pinions, you can't examine the ends, the pivots, and you can't peg out the jewel holes unless you strip the movement completely. So you're always best to strip the movement completely. There's the movement plate. It's in good order, nice and clean. Put all this through our cleaning machine, and here we are. We've obviously cut that short. This is putting it back together. The oils we've used, we've got HP 1300. That's an equivalent to D5, more or less. I prefer it because it's red. It's simply that I can see it easier when I put some on. It's not great to over oil watches as well as under oiling. So I like to be able to see quite clearly where I've put the oil, so I use this HP 1300. I'm putting the train bridge back on. So this is where a lot of people, particularly just starting with watchmaking, break pivots. You have to basically learn the feel of how to do it. Just practice, really. But that went quite smoothly, but basically just line it up, and then if you just work each wheel and pinion into its jewel slot. I use cocktail sticks sometimes, and only tighten screws once you've tested the train and it's all three wheels are spinning nicely. You'll only really break pivots if you use too much force, or you start screwing the screws down when everything's not lined up properly. that's one of the reasons I recommend this movement to anybody who's beginning, because it's quite easy to put back together really. Again, use the correct size screwdriver for the screws. These are finished nicely on this movement. You want your screwdriver ideally to fill the whole length of the screw head, not over the diameter of the screw head, because then you'll scratch plates. There's the new mainspring barrel going in. See, everything's nice and free. I like to test things like that as I go along. You'll pick up any faults as you're working rather than having to go back and strip things down again. Now this is something, I've nearly forgotten it there, but this is something to look out for here. The setting lever screw goes in at this point. Otherwise you'll come to build your keyless works and you'll have to take the barrel bridge off again. So always remember to put this in at this point. And many times I've forgotten to do that. I had somebody on one of the recent videos commenting on me wearing gloves. I've had a lot of people telling me to ignore the comments, and I'm getting a lot better at that, but one guy went on quite a strange rant about, I'm not going to use the language he used with the gloves, but it was basically like, what are you afraid of? Steel giving you cancer and all this sort of thing. I just found it quite funny that was something that made him so angry. Basically, I wear gloves because I don't like to put skin in the movements and leave fingerprints on movements. And it's the best way of doing that. I also think that when I'm videoing, it's just more attractive to look at gloves rather than my fingernails and hands, and so yeah, and basically for those reasons I wear gloves. It is best practice not to touch movements. You are taught, especially years ago, I spoke to an elder watchmaker, an elderly man once, and he told me that he worked at Gerard Perregaux in Switzerland a long while ago, and they would be observed while they were learning, and any time they touched the movement with their fingers they'd be hit with a ruler to learn not to do it. I tend to try and touch around the outside of the movement holder, and I wear gloves as well. So by the time we finish, there's no fingerprints, there's no skin in the movement, we get really high amplitudes, and we'll look at the movement under microscope after we've done as well to check for anything like that, and we do get really good results, really clean movements using these gloves. So I would always recommend them to anybody. One thing to look out for is to get powder free. Some gloves have talcum powder inside, and you don't want a lot of talcum powder around your workshop, so look for powder free gloves. But yeah, I think that's basically just a difference in generation. Sometimes older watchmakers don't do that type of thing, younger people do. Yeah, not something I'd ever really imagine somebody could get that angry over, but I guess some people do. And this screw going in again, remember again this is a reverse thread, basically so that the screw doesn't unscrew while you're winding your watch, so it's been designed with a thread that goes the opposite way, so don't forget that. I'll just skip forward a little bit. We've got the pallets in. I like to do that under a microscope so that I don't break pallet staffs when I'm putting the screws back in. So basically I get it in, make sure it's all lined up, check under a microscope or eyeglass, and then I'll hold it down normally with a cocktail stick and screw the screws in. and then just a little touch on one of the wheels to make sure that once there's a bit of wind in there, that the pallet's flicking across properly, and the train's nice and free. So at this point I like to put a little bit of power on the watch before I put the balance in. Just helps me to line it up as I go. You know it's in the right place before you put the screw in, because the watch will start running as soon as you get it in the right spot. Basically just line things up, and then you've got to get the jewel on the roller in the notch of the pallet fork, and when you do that correctly, the movement will run. There we are. And just make sure everything is lined up before you put the screw in, but you can see that amplitude is rising already. Now all that remains is to put the keyless works back in. I like to use grease on these. This blue grease we use, again, like the red oil, you can see where you've put it. Some people use D5 or HP 1300 on keyless works. I've worked on quite a few watches after other watchmakers have touched them, and you can see that after a few months the oils run all over the plate, and it's not where you necessarily put it. But if you look at a watch where you've used grease on these sliding parts, if you look in a few months' time, it will be roughly where you've put it. That's the point where we're thankful that we remembered to put the setting lever screw in, so we don't have to go backwards and strip the movement apart again. And there we are. Just make sure that's located properly in the stem. There's a notch on the stem where the setting lever slides in, and there we go. Tighten that up, and that's your crown and stem secured. The yoke in. Again, these parts are highly finished, and that it looks better, but it also reduces friction in the movement, so there is a functionality to high polish as well. There's a good example is when IWC use a 2892 in their watches. It actually has a weaker mainspring because their polishing is so good. The watch needs less power to run, so they have to use a weaker mainspring after they finish finishing the watch. So the watch finishing is not just beautiful, there's a reason for it. A little bit of oil on the setting lever spring, that's important to remember. If you fail to put that in, then when you pull your crown and stem out to change the time, it will feel very rough to pull out. when I'm fitting these, I like to line everything up, then put a small amount of pressure on the setting lever spring with the screw, so I don't fully tighten it, and then just flick the where the setting lever spring, there we go, just flick that into place, and then final tightening. Now we can wind the watch fully, and we'll see how the mechanism is running. You can already see there's great amplitude on that. I believe this part of the service was before I'd oiled the Inca blocks as well, so it's a great amplitude. Here's the case, freshly polished, and the buckle, looking great, all the scratches gone. Same with the bezel. It's a friction fit on the case. Beautiful AR coated glass as well. And this watch really would have benefited from a new strap, but the customer wanted to keep the old strap, unfortunately. But other than that, the watch has been given a nice new service, new lease of life, running again, ready for service again. Time to secure the dial. There are screws that secure the dial feet on this watch. They're not on the sides of the movement, they're in the movement. Basically an eccentric shaped screw, so that you just turn it slightly to lock the dial feet in place. Ready to place the hands on. We're using the press to put these hands on. They've got a black finish on them, so carbon fibre tweezers and the press. And here we are, the watch back in the case, looking nice and fresh. At this point I like to use a little bit of Bergin grease, just to help the watch just a little bit more waterproof. So I like to just poke a little bit down the hole where the stem meets the case. And we do that carefully so that we're not pushing the grease inside the movement as we put the stem in, just enough to get a little bit on the seal. All that remains are the case clamps, and then we can tighten the case back up again, put the crown guard back on, again using quite a large screwdriver so we don't damage those screws. nicely finished watch.